Okay, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's session. My name's Mike Posse. A lot of you probably know me anyway. I spoke to me certainly around storage over the last couple of years here and there. So I've brought together this session around safeguarded copy and also brought into it Cyber Vault. I'm going to run through a number of things. There's a lot of things to kind of cover. So apologies if I don't cover all the elements into the depth that you require. What I am going to do is at one point I will break out into showing our actual flash system 5200 we have in our Bracknell BSC. Also, I will show Copy Services Manager and how that pieces together. That's going to be the main body of what I'm going to discuss. But there's quite a lot of concepts here to kind of understand to make sure that we have a foundation of what actual safeguarded copy is doing, and then how does that actually knit into Cyber Vault. There's been kind of a little bit of confusion from what I've seen across the partners. Some of them have got it straight away, some of them haven't quite got there. But these two items aren't items that you'll see on a quote. They aren't something that you'll go out and buy. So with safeguarded copy, of course, is part of Spectrum Virtualized. Spectrum Virtualized runs on all our flash systems. So safeguarded copy was brought out in the code 8.4.2. So if you have a system mid-range and above that is able to run 8.4.2, you will be able to run safeguarded copy. All the newer systems, which are the 5200, the 7300 that released last month, and the 9500, will be shipping with 8.5. So 8.5 is the code to aim for at the moment, because 8.5 also includes some extra security features such as multi-factor authentication, which also starts to increase some of your cyber resiliency, I suppose, options, and being able to discuss that with customers. So the two components that you need to have safeguarded copy running in your enterprise is a flash system that is able to run that particular code, and also you need some scheduling software. So the scheduling software is Copy Services Manager, and Copy Services Manager is a separate product from Spectrum Virtualized. So Copy Services Manager, you can actually buy it on its own, or if you note within our lovely flash system calculator tool, it's part of Spectrum Control. And my advice to you is that Spectrum Control is probably the easiest and the most cost-effective way of procuring Copy Services Manager. Because if you're buying Spectrum Control, you will also get uplift on your storage insights. And that will help with your analysis of going to see if copies have been corrupted or if they've been tampered with, and then you'll be able to see the visualization of doing that. And it's a really good thing for you to look at. So those are two pieces of the puzzle that you need for safeguarded copy. Cyber Vault is a little bit more pieces of the puzzle than that, and I'll kind of allude to that and go through it. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what we're going to run through today. There's a lot to squeeze in the best part of an hour. We'll see how we go on timings. So what is Cyber Vault? So Cyber Vault is a blueprint. It is not a product that you buy. It is a methodology. You see here, straight in the middle. So there is actually a blueprint document that IBM have actually published that is able for us to view as business partners. Happy to share it with you. I will, if I have time at the end, I might perhaps run through a few elements with you. But essentially what I've done in this particular presentation for you is to highlight the sections that I think we need to kind of discuss. So today's session, because I only have an hour of your time, I'm going to focus largely on this section on the left, which I've highlighted it in yellow. So this is the immutable copies of data, and this is all around our flash systems and the safeguarded copy facility, being able to actually have those immutable copies, and then you see at the bottom, being able to recover from them really quickly. So that's kind of what I'm really going to focus on for today's session. but I also will mention around the proactive monitoring later on. And I'll also get to the data copy test and validation piece. And I'll also mention the automation. So you can see that already there's kind of a collection of things going on here. But really, when we're selling our flash systems, we're focusing on these two items on the left, which are the immutable copies of data and be able to rapidly recover from that. And to get your head around it, you kind of need to know a little bit about concepts of where that fits in and why that's important and what we should be focusing on as sellers, as storage sellers. So I've seen this slide thrown around numerous times, and I'm sure you guys are probably fed up of seeing it. I've seen a lot of discussion around attacks, and I've seen some presentations literally going about this for the whole session. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to quickly gloss over that. There's numbers in here that are scary, but what I would say to you as a partner is get your own story. If you have customers that you know have been attacked that you've helped, make sure that you're telling them that. I mean, I think to be able to say to a customer they have 4.25 million in average cost of breach isn't particularly relevant to a lot of customers. If you're speaking to a sector, have a look on the web. There's plenty of storage. Sadly, they're not very nice, but it's worth making sure that you're tailoring it to your particular client, and that will have a bigger resonating effect rather than some dollars numbers that IBM marketing have pulled out. So, cyber resiliency and cyber attacks. So there's two kind of components to this that we've got to think about. Historically, we've been protecting our systems against loss, corruption, or failure. So you think about it, we've been having HA solutions, backup. So say if like one site was destroyed or something went down, your electricity grid went down or whatever, being able to protect that is something that I suppose we've been talking about for a very long time in this industry. And that's kind of what I suppose is very much so what we've been doing in the past for a lot of our customers. So with cyber attacks, it's something a little bit further. So it's a real, I suppose, methodology of being able to secure your systems. And those attacks could be potentially come from anywhere. I have seen a lot of stats around a lot of attacks actually come internal to a lot of customers. So you can see here it mentions the trusted employees. And we also get sophisticated attacks, such as ones from outside your business, being able to do that too. Again, mobile data feeds. So it's all about actually fending off an attack rather than just keeping you up and running. And there are a few new regulations starting to come out as well. And this is going to really have an effect, especially for some of our managed service providers. Some of them are actually starting to say, well, you need to make sure that you have recovery points, being able to do that. So it's starting to become a real conversation for a lot of our customers. But it's just to say there's two elements for it. There's the actual resiliency piece that we've always had, but now we're going to have to take it a step further and actually look at security from a cyber threat point of view, I suppose. So this is kind of a slide that quite a few have probably already seen. So you can see it really here from left to right. We've got failure protection, which is our disaster recovery, our high availability. And of course, we've got disaster protection in the middle, on-prem, on cloud or hybrid, and data theft, which all of our systems, of course, run encryption. We have our flash core modules and we run encryption at no performance impact. And then on the right-hand side, this is what we're talking about today. This is what was released in that latest that code last year, which is 8.4.2, and now is on version 5. The immutability, the ability to have that logical air gap on-prem is really quite a compelling action for a lot of our clients. So this is a slide that I really want you to kind of remember for this session. And this shows the positioning of where safeguarded copy is against existing resilient options out there. So you can see here that we've got safeguarded copy, very much so as a warm standby snapshot, being able to restore really quickly. And because of that, your RPO and RTO is really low. And you can see the other extreme of the scale of things is the cold data vault with an air gap. So basically tape off site somewhere. So what we're doing here is we're giving a restore point on your production system on-prem to get to a real rapid restore point so fast, and being able to do that for customers is really quite compelling. Because if you think, well, I've got to fish through my backups to decide what I'm going to restore, that is going to take a lot of time. But in that, with it being on our production system, we have to be mindful of what we're actually doing with it. We have to understand what are we protecting, why are we protecting. It goes back to a whole wider piece, not just about we can actually copy and make immutable copies, but why are we doing it? How long should we keep it for? How often should we snap it? So it starts to ask lots of questions of how we're actually going to do it. Because we're doing it on our production system, as I say, we've got to make sure that we're not wasteful, but then we've also got to make sure that we're protecting the right things. So this is a really, quite an important chart to understand where actually safeguarded copy is positioned, and to show that actually we're as close to the production data as we can be, which is really, really important for a lot of our customers. So expect some virtualized safeguarded copy. So this I think we've probably seen this slide quite a few times, and we can see that basically we're taking multiple copies of production volumes. And then once you can see that we're able to take copies of these volumes to make sure that they're not being able to be modified or deleted due to errors or destruction. So also, if we separate our duties on our system, so we have multiple different layers of administrations on our system, depending on who you are, you might not be able to delete them. So we need to make sure that we're starting to use our logins correctly, and that will give you a basis of actually being much more secure in your environments. As you can see, we're able to provide such for 15,864 objects. So there's quite a few in there, but if you think about it, if we're snapping something every 6 hours, and if we're keeping that for a week, and we've got a lot of volumes, it does ramp up quite quickly. So it's just to be aware of that. And basically what we're doing every time we're taking a snapshot of these volumes, we're making them offline so they're not accessible from any server or application. So in effect, they're just safely stored in a backup location child pool. And that is how safeguarded copy is working. And basically, we are able to then restore those volumes in a number of ways. We can either look to restore it and then mount it to our host and then check, and then perform data validation onto it and then restore it to production. Or we could just restore it all to production, depending on what you see as applicable within your actual security policy, I guess. So that's what safeguarded copy is. And you can see here, we've actually a little bit of a diagram showing that safeguarded copy 1 wasn't relevant, safeguarded copy 2 wasn't relevant, but safeguarded copy 3 is what we want to restore. And that is how safeguarded copy actually works. So what I'll do now is I'll actually stop this share and load up our demo system, just to show you actually how safeguarded copy would actually work in the flesh. Okay. Right, so hopefully you can see our flash system 5200. This is sat in our business solution center in Bracknell. If you're obviously you're all partners with us, if you'd like to ever use this or demo it out to your clients, more than happy to do so, not a problem. So we got our flash system last year, and we've been using it throughout the year for lots of customer demos, and it's been really successful. What I would say about this particular system is that we are running, what are we on? We are on 8.4.2, as I kind of said at the beginning of our session. We will be looking to update that to 8.5 very shortly when it's released. So if I go to my dashboard, the simplest way for me to kind of, I suppose, to explain this to you is actually to create some volumes, make sure that we have a safeguarded copy pool, create a group for them, and then show you actually how Copy Services Manager picks that up. And then we can actually start to see how it makes copies of those volumes. That's what I'll do. So if I go to volumes, bear with me, I have to go as fast as my browser would go. Fortunately, I have probably one of the oldest systems in the world. So let me just create a volume, create some volumes. I'll create them pretty small. Sorry, this word Zoom just gets in my way all the time. I'm not going to do any mappings today. I'm just going to do it solely on the actual array rather than anything else. Just a note to yourself, every time we're executing something on a flash system, it's creating a command, you see? And that's just kind of a note to yourself for later on when I get into Cyber Vault. So you see here, I've created a host. Created a volume. And what we also need to do for safeguarded copy to work is to, when it actually kicks in, have a child pool. So you can see here what we've done. We've created a child pool. I'll show you what that looks like. Bear with me. So we can only have one child pool for safeguarded copy. So all it is basically you create a pool and you click safeguard, and then you'll see that you have this child pool, and then with a little shield on here. And what we'll do, so we've created our volumes. So our volume will be listed at the bottom of my, zoom out the way. I call it Friday. So there's my volume getting created. And what I need to do is create a volume group. And this is kind of the important bit, safeguarded copy. These are two I prepared earlier, which I've already put volumes in. So you can see here, I've got a new volume group that's got 2 volumes in. And then we've got BG0, and that has 2 volumes in too. So what I'm going to do is create a new volume group. Right, okay. You can see here, I can actually select to put my volume into my volume group. If you're an admin, this is probably a walk in the park. Very familiar to you, to be fair. But so what we've got here is our volume group, Friday 2020, with my volume that I've just created, which will pop in shortly when my browser updates. Oh, there you go. And what we will do is we go to group options, and this is the important bit. We can assign a safeguarded copy policy, right? And this is kind of the interesting bit. So all those volumes, we've just got the one in there today, just for demo purposes. We can actually select how often we want those copies to occur, and how long we want them to be retained. So IBM have created 3 different variants for us to do that. We can go into the CLI and change these if we have a particular rate of copy that we want to have, but these are the most common ones, and that's why IBM have done this for ease of use. So you can see here, I'm going to select the predefined copy for every 6 hours and retain for 7 days. So we'll copy it every 6 hours and it'll keep it for 7 days. So it's quite simple to do. You can see here we've got, to the extreme end of things, we've got copy every month, retain for 365 days. Would we use those? I guess it's conversation with your customer of what you see relevant. I do have a slide later on of data that IBM have compiled from using safeguarded copy on the DS8 platform over the last 3 years of what they see the most common copy rate and retention is as well. So I can choose my scheduled start date. So I'll choose today, and we'll choose a time that's similar to where we're at. So where we're at 01. Let's go for half past. Of course, need to put it to PM. So I've assigned that policy to that volume group, right? So you can see that one volume group has pending backups. And basically, as soon as we get to 1:30, it'll do my first copy of that particular volume. And how is it scheduling this? So the way it's being scheduled is we're using Copy Services Manager to do that. So what we do is we've actually got installed in our BSC in Bracknell Copy Services Manager on a virtual machine. You can run this pretty much in most locations. To be fair, it's not a weighty application by any sense of it. We've had discussions interesting this week. One of my clients wanted to run safeguarded copy in Azure, but then they of course wanted to put Copy Services Manager into Azure. It's like, could you do that? And the answer was actually yes. So it's actually quite flexible for you to do that. But basically what we're doing is we're giving Copy Services Manager a login to our 5200 and giving it access to being able to actually generate commands on base what we're telling it to. So if I go to our system settings, you can see here, if we go to our external scheduling applications, we've actually linked it to Copy Services Manager. And what does Copy Services Manager looks like? We go over here. So this is Copy Services Manager. You can use it for all sorts of things, not just safeguarded copy. We can use it obviously for scheduling of regular snapshots too. And we've connected it to our storage system. Let me show you. You can see here we've got our 5200 connected up. See our IP address probably on it. Yeah, you can see that's just connected up. So what it is, it's getting a view into that system, what's going on. So if I go to the sessions, I can actually see these automatically generated sessions by the system itself. So these are the two that we had before I started to do any work. And you can see here we have a new session which I've just created. So if we go into that, we can see actually at the moment we have no backups because we haven't got to the time that I scheduled in. And it'll do every 6 hours, and it's an automatically created safeguarded copy session. So you don't actually need to do anything, and that's why it's actually really simple to deploy and simple to use. So we'll just give that a couple of minutes until that starts to kick in. But if I go to one I've had previously, which had, what did it have? Two volume groups 2 volumes in there, sorry. You can see here, this has been running for quite a while. We've got 28 actual copies of those volumes. And these are done every 6 hours. I've done exactly the same here. And it's an automatically generated session. So you can see here, I've got all these copies. And that's why 15,000 sounds a lot, but actually when you start copying a lot of things, it isn't. So what we've got here is our immutable copies. If I went into our GUI, I'm here as a super user, so I'm breaking my own rules, if you like. But if you went in as a lower login, you wouldn't be able to delete these copies. You wouldn't be able to do anything with it. You can't mount them to a host. They are immutable copies. So what we can do within CSM, bear with me, we can go to session actions, and we can go to commands, and we have 3 options. We can actually make a manual backup of an existing copy, which could be useful for a number of situations. Say if you knew something was happening and you needed to do that. And if you think about it, every time I'm clicking on something in this particular copy services manager or Spectrum Virtualize, it's issuing a command. So there's no reason why you couldn't automate that. And that's where it gets interesting. So we're starting to see combinations of people detecting things happen. And essentially what it's doing is then issuing that command on your immutable copy. The other 2 options that we have is to recover the backup or recover backup to production. So what recover backup does, it restores it back into Spectrum Virtualize as a volume. And then what we could do is you then have to mount that to your host and then do some checks or some forensics, as IBM started to call it within the conversations. The final option is to back up straight to production. So that's kind of, I know it's good. I'm happy to do that straight away. I think most people will go with the recover to backup. So you can see, if I click up recover to backup, I'm basically just selecting my immutable copy that I want to restore to my flash system 5200. So you can see here, each of these has a timestamp to get it against it. And you can see if you had a way to look at your system to see if anything was happening or anything strange happening, you'd be able to use this timestamp to tell where you're up to as a system. Okay. Bear with me while I'm going to zoom out the way once again. But that's how safeguarded copy and CSM works in a nutshell. So let us go to our Friday volume group. So you can see here, we now have, we have a backup, we have a copy. And this will just keep going until I tell it to stop, which is really powerful and really easy to use. So if you have an existing system that is capable of doing this, you might want to start protecting some of your volumes. And it makes sense to do so because it's not that difficult to figure out how to do. So once you realize that if you've got access to Copy Services Manager and you've got a flash system that run the right code, to actually get this up and running is really simple to do. And that's the part of safeguarded copy that I kind of wanted to show you today. Okay, so let me stop that and go back to my presentation. Bear with me. Unfortunately, I'm in multi-screen territory at the moment. You saw my setup here, you'd realize why I'm having problems with lots of screens. All right, just bear with me. Right, let me share my screen. So I was talking about retention periods and the frequency and what we should look to do. Because everybody says, well, what should I look to have? Obviously, it depends on your particular customer scenario, but this is data from IBM themselves. They obviously run a safeguarded copy on DS8 for the last 3 years or so. So you can see here that the most common backup interval frequency is 4 to 6 hours per backup. Some customers, you can see, less common for 10 to 30 minutes per backup, and then less common for 12 to 24 hours. We can see that sweet spot is somewhere in between that 4 to 6 hours per backup. Obviously, we can change this, but it's worth knowing if your customer goes, well, I don't know, what's your recommendation? This is a good place to start. And you can see the retention period of 2 to 5 days. So the actual, the one that I selected had 7 days, so it gives me a bit longer, which is not a bad thing. But it's when I see customers saying, well, I want to snap this and keep this for months, we can do, but I do it on selected volumes. And that's the thing to be aware of. Okay. My slides are stuck. Right. So back to our Cyber Vault. So you can see that we've spoken about the immutable copies. And I've showed you how we can create a volume, put it into a volume group, and you can see that once we've got them in there, they're in a safe place, they can't be changed. And then you can see that using Copy Services Manager, we can then recover that really quickly. But you can see that actually there's a lot of gaps within that. You're thinking, well, how would, let's think about, well, what should I be monitoring to see that I know that I've got a problem? And how could I track that quite simply? So this is the proactive monitoring piece of Cyber Vault. So you can see that IBM have mentioned Storage Insights. Storage Insights, we're all familiar and hopefully familiar with Storage Insights. It gives you that historical record to go back through your performance management and to see what's happening with your capacity, see what's happening with those particular metrics. And then also it's mentioned integration with SIEM products, such as IBM QRadar. For those who aren't familiar with security products, we've just thrown in another acronym, assuming everybody knows what it is. So SIEM stands for Security Information Event Management. And basically what that is feeding in data across your enterprise. Obviously, QRadar is the one that we're most likely to talk about. But I peeled off the last year's Magic Quadrant for SIEM. And you can see here, actually, yeah, IBM are well represented into the top right-hand corner. But I would expect to see many conversations around different SIEM products. And that's why this blueprint isn't just IBM, it's outside of that. So if you have a client who's using something else and it's API driven, we can actually start to be able to address that and link that into your safeguarded copy onto your flash system. So it starts to give you that detection of where we're going to go. We could do another demo using QRadar, but we're not really going to have time for that. Otherwise, this will be a 2 to 3 hour session and we'll be here forever. To say the two products I tend to kind of look at is Storage Insights is the most obvious one, because if you've purchased Spectrum Control, you'll have Storage Insights to be able to go beyond 24 hours. You will then be able to monitor those changes in data reduction capacity ratios. Say if something weird happens, you'll be able to see what it is. And because you have those timestamps of those particular immutable copies, you'll be able to go make sure that you're restoring in front of that to be able to actually get yourselves up and running as well. So QDAR, we do have access to a demo that shows us how, if we had a user login that was incorrect or a administrator that has left the company, what it basically does is then use that to kick off a safeguarded copy based on those actions. So you can see in this particular diagram on the right, you can see a threat detection criteria. And basically, QRadar, you can set a set of rules depending on what you want. It is quite an in-depth product, as you'd expect, because it's obviously a leader in its field. But basically what it does on those set of rules, it'll then invoke that safeguarded copy onto your flash systems, and then we'll have an audit log of being able to do that and then be able to restore it. And that's how it's starting to piece together different functions and features. There is actually a brunch and learn taking place next week around this topic. I think it's around about for half an hour, so I'm not sure that I'm going to get through there, but maybe talk a lot faster than I do. It may be worth a run through with that as well. But maybe we'll run more sessions on this as we get to get through the weeks. So for me, the easiest way to do it, storage insights, because we don't have to go outside of our product specs as storage sellers. So storage insights, as we know, it can be part of spectrum control. We can look at that historical performance, and if anything unusual impacts alerts, we can create alerts, and there's an email, something weird happens. One of the most obvious ones to do is to look at the write data rate. Quite often with cyber attacks, if we find that to increase rapidly, so it means that something strange is happening or something's going wrong. So it can send you an alert, you'll know about it, and then you'll be able to look at your system and be able to do something about it with your immutable copies. Right, so we're nearly getting towards the complete picture of Cyber Vault actually starts to piece together. So the final piece of the puzzle is well, hang on. So I've monitored something. I've took an action based on something happened. I've got an immutable copy of data. I can restore that, but how do I actually start to test that data and validate? How do we ensure that that's corrupt free? I think one of my partners asked about, well, how does it actually work when it comes to databases? How is it when it comes to applications? And the answer is it depends what the application is, and it depends on what the database is. So if you actually look at the blueprint from IBM, they've put in a few utilities and tools for data validation. And lo and behold, no surprise to me that the ones listed are for databases. So we've got Oracle, we've got DB2 and SQL, MongoDB, and other third-party scanner tools. But then I think as this increases going forward, we'll get a lot of other tools added in. And it'll get interesting to see basically what we'll do is restore that using that restore function that I mentioned before. You'll then be able to map it to a host and then run these particular texts. So you can see here we've got DB verified and DB checksum, running a script on those particular database tables, and that's where it really starts to get into admin territory if you're running databases, and starting to kind of, depending on what you want to see and what you see as a valid security policy within that particular client. Interestingly, you'll see at the bottom of each of these suggestions, we have answerable modules, which suggests that we can automate these. So the final step of Cyber Vault, in my mind, from my point of view, is to automate this. So you can see that every time I've done something within our flash system, I've executed a command. Every time I've done something on Copy Services Manager, I've executed a command. It's all API driven. So we have Ansible modules that, of course, we can execute things against. So this is where it starts to get interesting and have real quite advanced conversations with your customers, are thinking, should you be automating this or not? That's the big question for me. I think this will be a real journey for a lot of our clients, but you can see that potentially we could be able to recover a safeguarded copy. We could mount it to a host and then do that data validation piece, because there's Ansible modules for that too. And we could do that all in an Ansible playbook in a click of a button, theoretically. Within the actual blueprint, there is actually no real detail of actually how this would be compiled together. But it depends on, I suppose, what your skill sets as a partner. We could actually start to engage with different partners. We do have a lot of partners who have great Ansible skills, so I've been able to do that if that's something you want to do. But you can see it actually with security, it's a tricky one. Should you actually automate or not? I guess it's a little bit of debate. I think some things you should. It will make it a lot easier. Some things, perhaps not. It depends on what the volumes are and what the attack is, I suppose. So this is the actual blueprint. I can send you a copy of this. I'll send it in a link actually with the replay of this particular session. But it kind of gives you a solutions guidance of what to expect. So steps to I'll step through this if I've got a couple of minutes. Steps to Cyber Vault. So the first step in my mind is starting to make use of safeguarded copy, and that's why I kind of spent a bit of time to go through that on today, and to use copy services managers to create those data copies. As you could say, it's quite an easy it's an easy thing to do. It's not particularly difficult. It's just a case of actually selecting your volumes and then selecting on the retention period and the copy ratio that you want to have. The testing them and restoring them, it starts to come back to, well, it depends on what your actual security policies are. So if you think about it, even from a wider perspective, well, what do you do if you're restoring it from backup? How do you do that today? And how would that plug into this? So it starts getting lots of wider questions of how do you do that? And the answer is it's probably quite complicated, depending on how large your enterprise is. But it can be a real, if you start to kind of understand how we can do that and how we can do that safely and how we can do that quickly, start to get down those recovery periods quite quickly and make a real difference to you and your customers. And then the third item is to automate the process. Being able to automate those tasks. Do I think we'll automate them all and go through the full set? I guess some customers will, because some people just really don't want to touch it. And then other customers will just want to go, oh, I want to automate that piece of it, but I still want to do the final data. I still want to do the final validation test myself. So you might find that the automation piece won't go so far, but it might not go all the way. That'll be interesting to see how we go along in time. So finally, before I show you quickly flick through the blueprints, your biggest step to take next is not only, of course, look at your systems to see if you can actually run safeguarded copy and with CSM to get that up and running on existing clients, which is the easiest thing to do, is actually to take an assessment. So IBM run no-charge assessments, Storage Cyber Resiliency Assessment Tool. We could run a session on this as well if you wish to do so. That is not a problem. But it gives those identification of gaps. We have strengths and weaknesses and best practices. It's a good thing. So it's very much so a good thing to identify, I suppose, anything that's weak within your particular customer. But it just shows that actually we can actually start to improve things. It might discover things that you find that you didn't thought you had, but you have, or there might be a lot of overlaps. If you think back to that chart that I showed at the very beginning, with safeguarded copy very much so being at the warmer end of restore, and then tape being at the far end of the cold restore, it's the combinations of all that, as per usual, as a restore method, being able to do that quickly and efficiently without having the overlaps. So it starts to bring in that real resilience across the piece. And that's where you need to get to. So really what we would like to see is a lot more assessments going out there from partners and end users. I think that will make a huge difference for us all. So let me just stop that share. And let me just show you what the actual blueprint looks like. With me. And another share. Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes left. So this is the actual blueprint. It's accessible by all of you guys as partners. We are at version 1.1. This will be updated, I think somebody said quarterly or half yearly, I can't remember which, I think it might have been quarterly. So I'm expecting this to bulk out quite significantly as we go along. I referenced it as a blueprint, they called it solution guidance. There's some good stuff in there just to remind you of the methodology, the way to do it. A lot of it's kind of what I've presented to you today. There's quite a lot of pages in there. It's got 29 pages, so it's not too bad at the moment. But I think it will get predominantly bigger as we go along. Again, we've got the whys and the whats and the whys as per usual, and then we've got safeguarded copy as being at the heart of it. That's kind of what I've wanted to make sure that you kind of understood today. And you can see that we've got the usual hump from IBM that we've seen in lots of presentations, and to be able to get that down as fast as we can. There you go, there's the hump shrinking down. And we can get to, it starts to slice it up into bits and pieces. So starting with immutable copies of data, because that's at the heart of this. That's what makes sense, and being able to start to have those point in time copies. And then we start to get into the proactive monitoring piece. And you can see here we've got QRadar suggested, but we also have other items on here as well. But it's basically showing, it's like we've got one that actually showing attacks on blockade switches and logins, being able to do demos with that. Fairly useful. That's the kind of chart that I had in my particular deck. But you can, and it also mentions Guardian, which kind of takes it a step further. And then we start to get into storage insights, and it starts to really kind of go through what I've kind of mentioned to you today. And then we start to get into the data validation piece, being able to execute that within copy service manager, being able to restore it, mount it to your host, and then be able to perform some analysis on it. So you can see here we've got some of the suggested tools, database focused at the moment, and then we get to some of the Ansible pieces as well. And then we get to the rapid recovery, and then of course we get to the frameworks, which we've kind of seen in this framework, which we've kind of mentioned quite a few times in the past. There are a few solutions architectural diagrams to be aware of, just to show you how to actually go through the process, which is quite useful. Again, a bit more around QRadar. And of course, if you want to engage with IBM, you can speak to those lab services. They offer Cyber Vault architecture workshops, installation configuration, and of course the automation piece. So basically, they'll be piecing all that together for you if you wish to do so. I would make sure that you have a chat to these guys if you want to do that, and where you want to start with that and where you're up to. So you might find that you're somewhere in the middle here, actually at the configuration piece, or maybe you're at the automation piece right at the end. It depends on what you want to do. And again, it just kind of gives you an idea of how it actually pieces together. I'd expect this document to get much bigger as we go forward, but you can see it's a good reference tool for you to have. We're on version 1.1, but yeah, we'll see how we go. Okay, so I think that's enough for a Friday lunchtime. Does anybody have any questions? Happy to go into it a little bit deeper if you want particular elements around certain areas. It is quite a lot of concepts for you to get your head around, but once you do get around them, you can actually see how it could actually really be quite a useful tool for a lot of your customers, because the attacks are happening, and people do need to have that resiliency. Can you share the doc later on? Absolutely. I'll share the link to the doc, and I'll share the recording to this as well. Okay. I'll just give you a minute. If you've got any further questions, I mean, basically, I'm quite happy to give you 5 to 7 minutes back. That's not a problem. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.